Hello and welcome to BERNINA Creative Studio. Today we're doing a small embroidery project. I'm Sylvain Bergeron. I'm an educator with BERNINA of America, and I like to play with the embroidery on the machine and in the software. Today it's a treat. It's on the machine. The whole project can be done on the machine. What we're doing is a little napkin ring that can also serve as a name card that is done in the hoop, and you'll be making 4 of them at the same time. So what we're making really is this. It's a little panel of cork fabric that has been embroidered with 2 flanking buttonholes to pass the fabric or ribbon through to form a ring, and then we will use a lettering in the machine to complete each name tag. The buttonholes will be brought in from the sewing side to the embroidery side, so this is all machine work. Of course, if you have the embroidery software, you could whip this up in no time at all. But if you don't have the software or your computer is not handy, you can do all of this on any current embroidery machine that BERNINA carries. So that will be a nice and simple project. What we will need for today is a large oval hoop, which everybody gets with their machine. And then here's the base materials. We will have a piece of cork. We will have a OESD fusible woven to basically line the back of the fabric to make it look a little tidier when it goes to the table. And then for the stabilizer, it will be a piece of stable stick, which is a lightweight tearaway stabilizer with a sticky side. And I will give you a few tips along the way on how I use that stabilizer. For the fabric, for the pass-through, the ribbon to complete the ring, if you want, I use leftover fabric. It's the end of a bolt that we had for the anniversary year fabric from Amanda Murphy. Anything that is festive, you could do polka dots, you could do stripes, anything really that you like that could add contrast. For today, I'm using cork fabric that has the gold fleck in it because it gives it a little festive touch. I'll be using dark thread, which is not necessarily what I would do at home, but for the camera, to make it more obvious for you, we'll use dark thread today, makes everything easy to spot. For instance, in this theme, I could have used silver thread for the lettering, and I could have used a very neutral thread for the buttonholes if I don't want them to show, or they could have been in silver as well. So you could have a silver and gold theme going. So that's really up to you. You just grab a spool of isocord and you'll be good to go. I will be at the machine, which by the way will be a BERNINA 570 Quilters Edition with the embroidery module. And that's the entry-level embroidery machine that BERNINA makes. That includes everything that you need to do the project. So anything from there up, and using an oval hoop, everybody has that hoop, everybody can do this. I'll be using the high thread tension bobbin case that is recently released by BERNINA. And if you remember, Artistas had a piggy tail bobbin case. The CB hook machines like Aurora have a finger on the bobbin case with a hole for extra tension for embroidery. Well, we now have that for the 5 and 7 series, which will guarantee better results across all types of embroidery. So that's really good. I use only one color of thread today, which makes it nice and easy. I'll use a dark color, as I said, to make it easier to see the contrast on the name tags. So for the camera, and I'll use the same isocord thread in the bobbin. That way it's nice and simple, one cone, wind my bobbin, put it in, ready to go. So after about 5-10 minutes of work on the machine, I will be able to run this out. The design takes about 15-17 minutes to run out. So let's say in about half an hour, you could be finishing your name tags and then move on to the rest. Because as we know, when you're preparing for a holiday meal or a big occasion, there's a lot of work in the kitchen. So you don't want to spend too much time in the sewing room. You want to be able to move on to the big production, which is the meal itself. So that will be the ideal project for that. So without further ado, let's begin. We're now ready to get started. So I have my BERNINA 570 Quilters Edition ready. I have the module attached. I have my straight stitch plate, my foot 26. I would be ready for the embroidery. I like to use the table. It supports the project. The hoop itself is fine, but it helps support the project around the hoop when I do something bigger. So it's just a habit. I always put the table on. You don't have to, but for me, it's easier. And if I switch to sewing, then I'll be ready to go. So I have that ready. I'm in embroidery mode because the machine was booted with the module attached. And again, to design on screen, to edit a design on screen, you do not need to have the module attached. The brains are in the head of the machine. So you could do this whole composition without attaching the module. So if you want to do some work at the machine, you can actually do that and then attach the module when you're ready to actually stitch out. Another thing you can do is download the simulator for the 570 or the machine that you are working with from the BERNINA.com website. The simulator will do everything, and then you can actually export the file and put it on a USB stick and bring it to your machine later. So if you happen to be at your laptop in the living room enjoying a cup of tea, you could build this design and not have to be in the sewing room per se. So that gives you more options. All right, what we're about to do is we will go to the sewing side in a minute. We will create one buttonhole. So by creating one buttonhole, we will size it, and then on the sewing side, we are done. We will switch to embroidery side of the machine, and in the embroidery mode, we will open this as a design. Then we'll duplicate it, and that we'll space it out. That will create the framework for a name tag. And then later on, we will add the lettering. Once one pair of buttonholes is done, what we will do is clone them and then move them so that we do one pair, two pairs, then clone that, and then move it down to have 4 pairs. At this point, all we do is add lettering. So let's begin. My machine is at the main embroidery screen. I need to switch to the sewing screen. So I will go to the home menu, select sewing. The machine will prompt me to make sure I have no hoop attached. That is correct. Confirm. And then it will initialize the module because it just booted and move it. Once I confirm finally, move it out of the way because I am on the sewing side. Last reminder is that my feed dog should be up if I intend to sew, but I don't. So I will leave it dropped the way it is right now because eventually I'm going back to embroidery. So when I confirm this, I am now at the sewing screen. I will not worry about the stitch plate, even though I have a straight stitch plate planning for embroidery because I am not sewing today. So I will actually just use the sewing feature, not actually run the sewing features. So I'm going to the buttonhole menu. The buttonhole I want something slightly decorative. And I find that buttonhole number 64 looks great because it has this rounded end if you want pointed at both ends. It doesn't look like a square buttonhole. It would be a little more decorative for something that will be on the table. So when that's selected, I go to my eye functions. And on the size, if I touch the size here on the screen, I can increase the size by using the knobs to 15 millimeters. That's 5/8 of an inch. That's your standard button. And it so happens to be that it will be the perfect size for the buttonhole cutter. I'll be able to do it in one cut. It's big enough to cinch a piece of fabric that will form the ring for the napkins. And it is just small enough to do that and not too big at the same time. So there you go. I have my buttonhole. It is ready. While it is on your screen here and on every current embroidery capable Bernina, the last stitch on your sewing screen can be retrieved in the embroidery mode. So I am done on the sewing side. I will go to the home menu. I will go to the embroidery, and I will now be ready to retrieve the design. Now, to begin the work in embroidery, there's 2 things I want to do. One is select the hoop. I'll be working with a large oval hoop today, and activate my grid. So first thing, I will need to retrieve the design first. And as I mentioned, if I go to the heart folder, the last stitch that was on your embroidery screen will always be the first stitch right there available. And that stitch will always be in magenta. You'll learn to recognize that color. Typically, you'll see a straight stitch, a little line. But since I had a buttonhole on the sewing side when I switched over, that is what will be on my screen today. So I will now work on my options. Out of the way, I will take the hoop and select the oval. And here's also my grid control, so I will turn on the grid. The first touch only activates the center crosshair. I want to touch a second time to activate the actual grid. That grid matches the plastic template that comes with your machine. And it is in metric, so that if you want to really be able to use your template accurately when you work, I behoove you to use the metric settings on your machine. That way everything will match 1:1. If you choose to work in inches. I know that for a lot of us, it's easier to work in inches. There is one conversion unit you need to remember. It's super simple. 1 inch is 25 millimeters or 2.5 centimeters. So, and that gives you nice round numbers as well. So while I am here, I'm done with this. I can also make sure I select my press-a-foot, number 26. And for the stitch plate, I'm in embroidery. Per se, it would not matter because in embroidery, the machine never moves the needle around. But when I put a restrictive plate on my machine, I like to tell the machine so that no matter what, if I forget when I move back to sewing later in the day, I will not break a needle. So this is all done, ready to go. I have closed the dialog box, and I am at the edit screen, ready to proceed. So to verify that your machine is in metric, I will go back to the home menu, to the settings, and now at the embroidery settings, there is a tape measure, the last control on the bottom right, that will give you the choice of millimeters or inches. So make sure millimeters is selected. That will make your work easier when you move the buttonholes around especially. So when that's done, I close the dialog box, I go back to the embroidery screen, and I am where I left off at the edit screen with my little buttonhole in the center of the hoop. And a little reminder, when we look at the position, when we move things like the buttonhole, we'll be moving them up and down and to the sides. When you move the X and Y indicators, for X being horizontal and Y vertical, whatever number you read there, like 0, 0 right now would be, that is the center of your design. The position is based on the center of that design. So we'll make use of that in a minute. Now that we have the first buttonhole on screen, I'm ready to move it to flank the edge of the first name tag, and then I will duplicate it and make a second one, bring it over to the other side. What I will do first is zoom in so that I can see my grid a little better. And there's my buttonhole. So all I have to do is to move it. And to make it easy, I made these so that they would end up being about 5 inches finished. So there's about 5 inches this distance between the buttonholes. The piece of cork is 6 by 9. So you'll have a little bit of trimming at the end, but not much. And this will make it easy to lay everything out. So I will take my buttonhole, and with the I functions, I can go to the move control, and then you see your X and a Y. So you have an easy option. You take the upper knob, which is the X horizontal movement, and I'm going to go to minus 500, and that is 5 centimeters on the grid. So that's super easy. There you go. I am at minus 500. All I have to do next is use the breadcrumbs on screen, touch the little yellow eye. That will backtrack to the main selection of functions, and then I have my duplicate. When you duplicate an object, it will offset it on screen. That way you see that you have two. If you look at the trays, the sequence trays on the right of the display area, you will see that the second one just showed up and it is selected. So what I can do is go back to the move icon, and this one I can move it back to the other side. So I can crank the upper multifunction knob that moves sideways until I have plus 500 on the screen. And since it was offset, you know already that it's below the first one. We need to correct that. It's very easy on Bernina's. The position indicator is actually the reset button. So if I go to the Y indicator and touch it, it resets it to Y equals 0, which means vertically it goes back to center. So now the two of them are aligned. That's it. I am done. I will be ready now to make the other pairs. The last thing for this first pair is, since it's in the middle, and my hoop can only fit 4 tabs, it needs to move up a little bit so that there will be 4 of them when I'm done. So I will select the pair. So when I look at my trays, the stack of the sequence, the embroidery sequence, notice I have 1 and 2, yes. And if I go all the way to the bottom tray is select all. So when I select all, I can now move up with the lower multifunction knob, the vertical motion, and move that up until it says Y equal 250. That is 2.5 centimeters, so 1 inch above the center. And that will place it right in the correct position. That's the first one. From here, it's duplicate and move the next pairs, and duplicate again and move again, and we'll be done. We have the first pair of buttonholes. It's time to make 4 pairs of buttonholes. So just a little recap here. We started from the center. We moved the first pair up by 2.5 centimeters. And so you know that the next one down here would be 2.5 centimeters down, which means it's 500, 5 centimeters apart. So we'll take this first pair, we will clone it, and then move it up to we were at position 250 on the y-axis. So we'll add 500, which will be 750 up there. So let's do this. If I look at the stack on the machine, everything is still selected because I just moved it up. I can now go backtrack on the breadcrumbs in the I functions and use the duplicate command again. That will create a second pair that is duplicated, but it's already selected for me. So I don't have to do anything but go to the move control and then move it up until it says 750. Now there's two ways to do this. You could grab with your finger, move it up fast, and then fine tune with the knobs if you want. But I find that it's fast enough with the multifunction knobs alone that I don't have to do this. If it's on a large hoop like a jumbo or a maxi hoop, then sometimes it's easier to drag something up and then fine tune the placement with the knobs. So this second pair is now in the upper position, and on my screen I now have 4 buttonholes in the upper half of the hoop. The next step will be to clone that pair and make it drive down to the bottom, to this bottom half of the hoop, so that I now have 4 pairs. So with that second pair selected, I need to go down, scroll down to the bottom of my stack of trays and select all of them. So select all at the bottom, we'll select all 4 buttonholes, and I backtrack on my breadcrumbs in the I functions, and I go back to duplicate. I will now get a second set of 4, and they're offset down a little bit from the first set. So all I have to do is, again, go to the move control and move down until the center says minus 500. The reason is, when I did this pair, this is 250, this is 750 on the Y position, which means the middle of these two is 500. And as I said before, when you duplicate those, the position indicator will reference the center of a set of 4. So if it's 500 here, it needs to be minus 500 down here to match. And that was nice and easy. It is all done. I can zoom out at this point and see that my buttonholes are all laid out on my screen. I will be ready to add the lettering next. To add the first name is pretty straightforward. I'm starting from my screen with all the buttonholes already done. My I functions are still open. To close the I functions, as usual, there's more than one choice. One is to touch the little X on the top right corner, which is kind of small, or you can just touch the I control, the circle around the I, which is a little bigger and for me easier to reach. So I typically close the dialog via the I function control. Now, I just need to add. So to do this, on my stack of trays for the sequence, the last one at the top, and if you are not at the top, you would scroll back up until you see the plus sign. That is add a layer. So I am going to add a layer. You have to be careful not to go retrieve a design. If you use the main folder and retrieve, you will replace your buttonholes with a blank slate. So add a layer. I want to go to the alphabets. And at the alphabets, I will select the second one. So the first name I chose was Mary. It could be any name of your choice. First uppercase, then a switch to the lowercase letter, and then A-R-Y. So there we go. With Mary, I confirm. It will come in on screen at its default size. So what I will do is I will actually move Mary up, and I don't need to open anything. I can move the lettering up with the multifunction knob on the bottom, what's normally the stitch length, and place it generally. And if it's too big, I can now resize it by going to the I functions, going to the sizing control, and then I will reduce it to leave a little space. And I found that about 75%, 70% did a good job of sizing this so that the name is not too big. The reason is that if the name is too big, once you put it over a napkin, it may wrap under a little bit. You may lose a little bit of it. So I'd rather have a name a little smaller and have it fit properly on the center of the tag. So to finalize the sizing and position of the name, I started from the top when I did mine. So I did this one at the top first. So I did two things. For the size, I went back and checked on the size, and with just the name selected, I wanted it at about 25 millimeters, 1 inch tall. And I eyeballed it here and it ended up at 1 inch. So it fit pretty well. For the position, I go back to the positioning controls. And then all I needed to do is move the Y vertical position to 750, which will line it up with the buttonholes. Now, there's a bit of geometry involved here. My name has a big S that juts up, and it has a Y that juts down. The positioning is the center of the design, as I mentioned. So what happens is that if you have a name like Pamela, where only the P juts up, the rectangle around the name will have the center slightly above the M. And that will affect how this lines up with the buttonholes. Now, it may not matter much, depending on the size of the lettering, but you may want to fine-tune the positioning. So 750 was to line up the center of the name, Mary, with the center of the buttonholes. And since the Y juts down and the M juts up, that pretty much did a good job of centering this. But if visually you would like the name to be a little lower, because sometimes only one letter juts up or down and it throws a whole geometry off a little bit, then you can actually still fine-tune with the multifunction knob. Super easy. Okay. Now Mary is in place. At this point, very, very simple to add the other names. I would just go to close the iFunctions, add a layer. I'm already on the alphabet. Select the alphabet again, type the name, and then confirm it, and then resize it and position it at 250, minus 250, and lower at minus 750, and you will be done. You will end up with the panel completed. When this is done, you're ready to stitch out. That's all there was to it. Now again, you could do all of this with embroidery software. And if you have, for instance, V8 software, you can whip this out in 5 minutes. And then you can play with colors. You could play a whole bunch of stuff very rapidly on the computer. But you don't need the software to do it. You can do this on your machine. And all BERNINA embroidery machines can do this. So that's the beauty of it. And there's times if my laptop is, I left the laptop in downstairs, I don't have it upstairs, I can just boot the machine, do it right on the machine, and get going. So we will do that. We will now switch to actually doing the embroidery. I'm ready to hoop my fabric, and I'll be using a piece of cork. Now, cork fabric, I prefer not to hoop sandwiched between the rings of the hoop. I do not want hoop burn on my cork. First, it's an expensive fabric, relatively, and it may not, even though you can steam it, it may not come back 100%. So I will float this piece. Now, my tags are 5 inches wide by 2 inches tall. That was the size I planned for them. So that would be 5 inches by 8, and I have a piece that is 9 by 6. That happens to fit pretty well right in the large oval hoop without giving me any trouble. So to float that, I will be using stable stick. Stable stick is a tearaway stabilizer, a lightweight tearaway, and it is sticky on one side. Now, if you try to hoop this, what happens is that the wax paper between the rings of the hoops basically undermines the stability of your hooping, because this is slippery. So whatever is sandwiched in those rings is slippery. I prefer to pre-peel my stable stick. And the reason is, when I do this, I will have a sheet on the mat, and it's somewhat translucent. And now the funny part here is that if you put your finger down on it too much, it wants to come with you. I can see my grid through here, so that when I place the hoop, if I need to place something afterwards, you'll see I can actually position accurately. So I have my hoop with my little triangle pointing towards me. Little tip at home on my hoops, I use a permanent marker like a Sharpie, and I colorize both little triangles on both halves of the hoop. That way, I don't have to look, they find themselves out. So when it's time to put this on, if I just drop this and there's a little bit, this is the end of the roll, it's curling a little bit. It may ripple a little bit, it may not be perfectly flush. What I do when I hoop is I put the right side away from the clamp down, I hold this down here, and then with my other hand, I open my fingers up, I just tap onto the stabilizer, and then I will open my hand to pull up and down if you want to stretch out, if you want to spread out, and away from the first side, so that when I'm done, I have a perfectly flat piece of stabilizer. Now here's where the plus comes in. Not only I won't have slippery, waxy paper undermining my hooping stability, but now I have a tacky paper that will cling to the hoop when I put it into the outer ring. So at this point, and at home, I use a master hooper. So at this point, I put this in the hoop, and when it goes in, I can feel already it is clinging to itself. I will go to the edge of the table and turn the screw. And when that's done, I don't need to go super tight. This is clinging, the tacky side is clinging to the entire perimeter of the hoop. That is now stable. Now, what I was saying earlier is that you can position this. The triangle here is center of the hoop. And then if I position the brackets to be centered on a line, that will let me find the center of my hoop easily here. With the cork, to center it in the hoop, I can just quickly crease it just here if I want to, although cork doesn't crease very well. What I did on my test sample is I used a little marker, and I marked a little bit here. But in this case, if this is the center and these two template supports are centered in the hoop, then all I have to do is, once I found my center, generally line these up here. I have about a ½ inch margin around the entire perimeter, so I am not going to be embroidering myself into a corner. And I will now, and I like to use a swirling motion with light pressure to go around the entire thing. I start from the center, move to the outside. That will do. I do not need to use the basting function in the machine. This will stay put. So that is hooped and ready to go to the machine. When I go to the machine, a little tip, when you put the hoop on the machine, you have to wait until you've gone to the OK, the embroidery screen. So I will touch the needle on my screen. The module will then verify. Now it did its initialization and it moved in. The screen is telling me put the hoop on. So that is now ready to run the embroidery. I will confirm on the screen that the hoop is there. The machine verified that the hoop is there. Everybody's happy. It will now start stitching. I want to mention a couple of things first. Remember a few minutes ago I mentioned that the sewing stitches that you bring into embroidery are in magenta. They will always be. That makes them recognizable. And then the lettering, when you add it, comes in black. So the two can be separated. So if you wanted to do your buttonholes in one color and the names in another, that facilitates that process. I will be using the single color control, the monochrome control today, so that everything will be one color. The other thing is that when you bring names, for instance, each name will have a color stop at the end. Even if they're all in black, the machine would stop. Normally, if you don't have monochrome or a single color mode engaged, it would stop after each name, just in case you want to change colors between names. Again, that gives you flexibility. If everything's to be in one color, like my project, I will engage the single color mode. I am now ready to stitch it out. I have a machine, the speed slider, full up, but no rabbit. So that's usually fast enough. My machine is using thread away. All Bernina embroidery machines currently have thread away. And here's where thread away comes in. When the machine cuts at the end of an object, it will free up the tail and then re-enter. And from the top, that tail will be pulled under. And from the top, there's no cleanup when you are done embroidering. Voila, my embroidery is done. I have my 4 pairs of buttonholes and the names centered along each one. So when I press the confirmation on screen, it goes back to where the stitching had begun. I am ready to take the hoop out. I like to just pinch it and then slide it off. So the next step will be to take this off of the hoop and then trim and fuse on the back. So let's begin that cleanup process. Okay, time to clean up our embroidery. First, I will unhoop the usual, release the screw, and then the outer ring will come out very easily. Remember, the stable stick will have clung, and sometimes it may leave residue. On average, I found that's not a big problem. It may leave a little tacky residue. If it's a moderate amount, it usually doesn't matter. It actually makes the hoop a little clingy on your next project. So easy peasy. I will now peel the stabilizer off. And what I will do is I always start tearing. And this is clingy because it's a stable stick. So I will tear along the edge and get the outside out of there. And I'm not too worried at this point. is just to get the bulk of it out. Then, and as I said, it's clingy. Then I will rely on my handy dandy Bernina tweezers and just tear off the rest. So that goes pretty fast. You want to do this because the next step will be to actually fuse. And if there's a little bit left over around the names, it's no biggie. But you want the bulk of it removed so that when you fuse the fusible woven, which is the liner that will basically make the back of this project look a little better, since it's a presentation type project. The back of the cork fabric feels a bit like a knit, and it will cling very well. So the stabilizer in the hoop did a very good job at holding that cork in place. There was no shifting. They like each other. They stay together. The key for me was to make sure that between the buttonholes and the name, the stabilizer is removed. That way, there are no gap in fusing. So when that is done, you have the option to trim your thread tails if you want. Now, you could have used a thread that matches the back of the cork for the bobbin. And by using the high thread tension bobbin case, that would have pulled the top thread down, but most of your thread tails would be in the matching color. I will get the long ones, like the startup ones, out because I don't want them to show, because they might peak a little bit, they might show through a little bit, the fusible. But I don't bother with the little guys. To me, they did not matter that much. So the next step is my fusible woven. That has a texture where the fusible material is. It is pretty uniform actually, but it has a texture, a little grit to it. So that tells me which side to put against the project. At this point, with a high steam iron on, I like to use a lower setting than cotton, and then keep it on longer. It will give me a better fuse down the road. So what I do is I use my iron on high steam, and then I revoke the steam and let it dry, and it finishes the fusing. When that is done, you will end up with this. And so this is now ready for trimming. We're on the home stretch. We're now ready to cut the labels apart. So I am going to use my rotary cutter and ruler, and easy peasy, 1/2 inch margin on the outside along the buttonholes. Cut that, go to the other side, do the same thing, and voila. Now, I will not do these because these are all 2 inches, so it's easier to start from the center. And I will use the buttonholes as my guides. So I will go to the middle between the buttonholes and cut that. Then after that, it's easy. It's 2 inches. So if I go just to 2 inches, that automatically puts me to the middle of the next one. And 2 inches again puts me to the bottom of the last one. So I don't have to worry about dimensions. It takes care of itself. Very easy. I like to break down my projects in baby steps. That way, none of it becomes a big ordeal. I just, go along, do a little step, and it takes care of itself in the end. The sequence will take care of the final results. So when that's done, I'm on my last one. I am now ready to cut the buttonholes open. So I'll be using my BERNINA buttonhole cutters, which is pretty standard. I like to keep the box because last week when I was looking for mine at home, guess who could not find the little wood block? It's kind of useless without the wood block. So keep the box, keep them together in the drawer. They stay nicely put. So the buttonhole cutter has its blade. Keep the guard. It's important. This needs to be super sharp. This is a sharp blade. It's a chisel, actually. The blade is angled, which means it separates the fabric as you cut the buttonhole open so that it will not cut through things that you don't want to. If a buttonhole is large enough, the way to use these is that you put the buttonhole half on and half off. And then by placing the blade on one side, you press down, and you will hear the crunch sound through the material, and then you go to the other side to do the other half. And if the buttonhole was very long, let's say for a strap on a bag or something, you would have to do the middle as well. So that will open up your buttonhole. I need one more little cut in the middle. Now, in this project, because I use a 5/8 of an inch buttonhole, this is the length of the blade. This blade's pretty standard. So in this case, I did not have to worry about this. I could just position my blade right in the middle of the buttonhole and cut. And you hear the cut when it happens. That's it. My buttonhole is open. I'll repeat with the other three, and I'm ready to go and form up the napkin rings. We're ready for the final step, to put together the napkin ring. And remember that if you omitted the buttonholes, this can be just a place card. But if you include the buttonholes, you can now make the napkin ring. So I have my napkin here. These are nice, soft linen napkins for a festive occasion. I plan on using a 2-inch wide strip of fabric. Now, I could have pre-measured and tried to fit it in and all that. I like to eyeball it and keep it simple. So I cut a strip instead. So what I will do is, from one end, I will enter the buttonhole. So I will just kind of fan fold here across the short dimension and push it through. And my big fingers don't fit into the little buttonhole that easy, so I will use my tweezers to get the fabric through. And there you go. As soon as I get poked through, voila. So that goes through here. And I will fluff this later. I will coax that later. So at this point, I need about this much to have a little wing on the other side. So if I show you the one I'd made before, it's about a couple of inches on the side to taste, as they say in the cooking shows. So this time I reinsert, but from the back to the front. So I'm going to bunch it up, put it through, and again, I may have to use my tweezers to get in there. If the buttonhole is too big, too long, you will not get that little pleating effect at the end that you want to have. So when that's there, make sure that the fabric is not twisted. So I will now coax this. And there's no fancy version of this. As long as it's pleated a little bit and it's right side up, you're good to go. I will open this up a little bit, take my napkin, pass it through, like any napkin ring. And I found these are buttery. They don't hold any particular shape. So what I did is I just pinched the middle, and then I just did this to coax it a little bit, and it domes just a little bit. At this point, I will cut this off. And what we did with this one is I just used a scissor and notched the end to make it look that way. So that would be it. That's that simple. You can make these, and if I cut my strip here and then notch it later, I can keep my strip going and do several of them. And I don't have to pre-cut everything. I can just cut as I go. And that will take care of it. You can do this with white ribbon and with strips of fabric. It's perfect with leftover fabric. And if you quilt, you probably have nice colorful fabric to use for the purpose. So that is it for finishing the project. So to recap today, we used the machine to do everything. It was just a few minutes. We leveraged both the sewing and the embroidery side. We combined the two. So I like projects that not only do something for my table, but that let me use everything that I purchased. You know, that is a significant investment, and I like to be able to use all of it. So I hope this gave you some ideas today. And make sure you play with your toys, because that's the fun part. And then when you get to your table, you get that little gleam in your eye that you know that you were able to do more than just put the table settings on. You were able to dress them up a little bit with your Bernina. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us for Bernina Creative Studio, and we look forward to more projects and more ideas next time.